The chair was empty. What happened next changed everything. My name is Thomas Calloway, and the day my company honored my 40 years of service was also the day I understood that my only son had stopped seeing me as his father. The ballroom lights faded as the MC stepped toward the podium, smiling at the hundreds of employees, executives, and guests gathered inside the downtown Cincinnati Convention Center. "Ladies and gentlemen," she announced, "today we honor a man whose quiet integrity has shaped this company for 4 decades. The large screens behind her filled with photographs from another lifetime. There I was in 1986, wearing an oversized hard hat that belonged to a much bigger man. Another image showed me standing beside co-workers whose faces have since left this world. Then came photographs from company picnics, volunteer days, charity drives, and retirement celebrations where I had stood applauding everyone else. Today was finally my turn. The applause moved through the ballroom like a wave. I smiled politely, but my eyes kept drifting toward the front row. One chair was empty. A small white card rested on the seat, reserved for Marcus Calloway, my son. The camera followed my gaze. The audience followed the camera. Even before anyone spoke, the room understood what that chair meant. It was supposed to belong to family. Instead, it belonged to silence. The MC walked closer with a careful smile. "Mr. Calloway, would you like us to wait a few more minutes?" I shook my head. "No." She hesitated. "Would you like someone to sit beside you?" I looked across the ballroom. Near the back stood a young man in a navy suit that wasn't expensive but had been pressed with great care. His hands were folded in front of him. He looked like he wasn't entirely sure he belonged there. I smiled. "David." His eyes went wide. "My late best friend's son. My late best friend's boy." The audience turned toward him. "Would you come sit with me?" He looked almost frightened. "Me? Your father would have been sitting there if he were still alive." The room went quiet. David walked slowly down the center aisle. He sat beside me. I rested my hand briefly on his shoulder. "Thank you for coming." His voice came out just above a whisper. I wouldn't have missed this. 5 minutes later, our CEO returned to the microphone. He glanced at me, then looked toward David. "There is one final surprise." I frowned. No one had mentioned any surprise. "Years ago," the CEO continued, "Thomas Calloway quietly declined several executive retention bonuses and asked instead that the company create a legacy fund, honoring loyalty, sacrifice, and service to others." Murmurs spread across the room. "Today, that fund officially begins." He paused the way people pause when they know what comes next will change the room. The first recipient was personally selected by Thomas. Every camera turned toward me. "David Sullivan," the CEO said, his voice warm, "will receive an $800,000 legacy gift." The ballroom erupted. People rose from their seats. Some cheered. Others pressed their hands to their mouths. David froze. I think there's been a mistake." The CEO smiled. "There hasn't." David covered his face. I simply squeezed his shoulder. "You earned this." 3 hours later, I sat alone in my truck outside my small ranch house. My phone had been buzzing without pause. When I finally looked, 112 missed calls. Most were from Marcus. The rest from his wife, Diane. Unknown numbers. Old relatives. Even a reporter or two. I stared at the screen for a long moment. Then I placed the phone face down on the passenger seat. Because the story everyone had just witnessed on television had actually begun years earlier. Until about 6 years ago, I never imagined my family would drift the way it did. My wife Helen and I had built a simple life. Nothing glamorous. Nothing anyone would envy or photograph for social media. Just honest work, cookouts in the backyard, camping every summer, Friday night pizza, church on Sunday mornings. Marcus grew up in that little brick house believing we weren't wealthy. The truth was, Helen and I simply believed money should buy security, not attention. Helen passed away after a short battle with pancreatic cancer. Marcus was 31 then, already married, already building his own life. Her death changed something in both of us. For me, it created silence. For Marcus, it created distance. At first, I told myself that was normal. People get busy. Jobs demand more than they should. Marriages need tending. Life moves forward. I understood all of that. I never expected weekly visits. I didn't expect holiday dinners every month. I only hoped we would still be father and son. Instead, our conversations slowly became appointments. Dad, can I call you back later? Dad, we're tied up this weekend. Dad, maybe next month. Months became seasons. Seasons became years. When Marcus did visit, Diane always seemed eager to leave. She wasn't openly rude. She simply behaved as though spending time with me was another obligation squeezed between vacations, brunches, and social events they genuinely preferred. I didn't blame her entirely. Marriage changes a person's priorities. But somewhere along the way, my son stopped making his own decisions. If Diane wanted something, that became Marcus's opinion, too. I noticed it in small things. He stopped coming over to watch football. Stopped asking for my advice. Even birthdays became text messages. Still, I never complained. Parents don't keep score. At least, good parents don't. Then, about 3 months before the ceremony, our company made an announcement. The board wanted to honor employees with 40 years of continuous service. Only 2 people qualified. One had retired quietly overseas. That left me. The communications team wanted interviews, archival photographs, television coverage. Our local news station planned to broadcast portions of the ceremony live. The company had become one of Ohio's largest employers. Honestly, I would have been perfectly happy with a handshake and a sheet cake in the break room. But our CEO, Richard Holloway, wouldn't hear of it. You've spent 40 years taking care of this company, he told me. Let us take care of you. A week later, I drove to Marcus's house. He answered wearing golf clothes. Diane was loading suitcases into their SUV. Heading somewhere? I asked. Weekend trip. Before you go. I handed him the invitation. He opened it. His eyes widened. For several seconds, I couldn't speak. Apparently, finally, I looked up. That's your pretty impressive, Dad. David he looked at Diane quietly, then back at me. I've spent 20 years hoping you'd say that. He hugged me. Before we walked inside, my phone vibrated. I believed every Marcus word had posted because no matter how old your child becomes, he and Diane always believes the promises resort pool. I had no idea that only 24 hours before the ceremony, my phone would ring, his name would appear, and a short conversation would change everything. Life is too short. His name stayed on my screen for several seconds before I answered. Both of them smiling. I already knew. I locked my phone and turned toward David. His voice sounded too cheerful, as the way voices sound when someone is building up to something 2 hours. The entire country watching that broadcast would witness a moment none of us had expected. Found this the ballroom looked even larger, a luxury resort in Scottsdale. More than 400 people had gathered. We leave executives, tomorrow morning, factory workers, tomorrow office morning, staff, retirees, of community ceremony, local reporters. I leaned against my kitchen television camera and looked out the window quietly near the maple tree Helen and I everything had planted 25 years earlier was far more than anything I had imagined when I'd said yes to the ceremony. Started David in the afternoon, and I sat together in the front row. But we kept glancing around already as though someone might realize he didn't belong. You haven't booked I leaned yet toward him. A long pause. No, I'm trying. So you could you look like you're about to take another final exam. Then I heard Diane's voice in the back classrooms full of teenagers. Tell him they'll somehow understand. This is scary. Marcus lowered his voice. Teenagers are tougher. We've both been exhausted. That finally Diane made him really settle. Needs this. A few seats away, I smiled members of the executive board. I understand. Most had worked with me for decades. We'll celebrate several next week. Small nods. I'll take you somewhere. Others came over to shake my hand. Sounds fine. But every few minutes, you're not I noticed someone's eyes drift toward the empty chair that had been reserved for Marcus. He nobody nervously where he was. I guess you've learned nobody not to sweat the small stuff. The empty seat spoke if loudly enough. He knew. At exactly 2 o'clock, The house went quiet. A video began. I stood
across
holding the
3
phone
large
long
screens.
after the call
There
ended.
I was,
Helen
27
used to
years
tell me
old,
something
hair thick
whenever
enough that I
Marcus
barely
disappointed
recognized
me
myself.
as a teenager.
Standing beside
Don't
the first
react
production
while
line
you're hurting.
I ever
Wait
supervised.
until you're
Another
thinking
photograph
clearly.
appeared.
Helen
She
and
was
me
always
at the company
wiser
Christmas
than I
party
was.
in 1991.
So I didn't call him
She wore
back.
a red dress
I
she'd
didn't
bought on
send a
clearance
guilt-filled
because we were
text.
setting aside
I
every
didn't
extra
tell him
dollar
how
for
much
Marcus's
his
future
absence
college
would hurt.
fund. Instead,
looked
I opened
beautiful.
my contacts
The next
and
image
scrolled
showed
to
another
Marcus
name,
himself,
David
7 years
Sullivan,
old, wearing
He
an oversized
answered
hard
after the
hat
second
during
ring.
family day.
Mr.
He had
Calloway,
insisted
I
he
hope
wanted
I'm
to
not
work beside his
interrupting
dad
anything.
someday.
Not
My
at
chest
all.
tightened.
I have a
Funny
favor
how
to ask.
life changes.
Anything.
The audience
Not
applauded
even a
as
moment
each
of
decade
hesitation.
passed across the screen.
That alone
40
tightened
years
my throat.
compressed into
My
5
company
minutes
is holding
looks
a
simple.
ceremony tomorrow.
Only I knew how many
My
missed
son
weekends,
won't be coming.
overnight shifts,
I'd like
late
someone
birthday
sitting
celebrations,
beside me.
and quiet sacrifices had filled the
Then
spaces
softly,
between those photographs.
"You want me there?"
The MC
I do.
returned to the
I'd
stage.
be honored.
Thomas Calloway
No
has become
questions.
more than an
No
employee.
excuses.
No
She
checking
smiled.
his schedule.
He became the
no
standard
asking
the
what
rest of
was
us
in it
measured
for him.
ourselves
Just,
against. I'd be
more
honored.
applause.
I smiled
Then
for the
she
first
invited
time
our
that evening.
CEO,
Your
Richard
father
Holloway,
would have
to the
been
podium.
proud of you.
Richard
His voice
wasn't
cracked.
a flashy
I
businessman.
hope so.
He'd started
I had first
sweeping
met
warehouse
David
floors
nearly
while
30
attending
years
college.
earlier.
Eventually,
Back then,
he was just a
became
wiry little
president
kid
of the
racing his
company.
bicycle down
We
our
had
neighborhood
always respected
sidewalk
each
while
other
his father,
because neither
Michael
of us
Sullivan,
had forgotten
grilled
where we
burgers in
started.
the backyard.
He adjusted
Michael
the
wasn't
microphone.
just my coworker.
I've spent 31
he was
years
my brother
working
beside
in every
Thomas.
way except blood.
He looked toward
We started
me.
at Midwest
in all
Industrial
that time,
Systems
I
only
never
6
once
months
questioned
apart.
whether he
Same
would do the
factory
right
floor.
thing. Same impossible
He paused.
supervisors. Same
Sometimes
mandatory
the right
overtime
thing.
cost him
We
promotions.
bought our first homes within
The
a year of
audience
each other.
stirred.
Our
He
wives
turned down
became
executive
close friends.
opportunities that would
Our
have
sons
required
grew up
relocating
playing
his
catch
family
together.
across the country.
Some
of my happiest memories
nodded
are of
toward
Michael
me.
laughing
He
so
also
hard he
declined
couldn't finish his own
bonuses
story.
on several
He had
occasions.
a deep laugh that pulled everyone
frowned
else in
slightly.
with it. The kind of man who
agreed
never
to
walked
discuss
into a
that.
room without
Richard
making
smiled,
it brighter,
as though reading
then
my
came the
expression.
explosion.
I know
a
Thomas
maintenance
hates
shutdown.
attention.
A faulty
Laughter
pressure
moved
valve
through the room.
The wrong
But
moment.
today isn't
everything
about his
happened
comfort.
in seconds.
It's about telling
Metal
the
screamed.
truth. One
Steam
executive
filled the room.
after another
I
came
couldn't
forward
see.
with stories.
Something heavy
A maintenance
crashed
supervisor
beside me. Described how
Then
I'd stayed through the
another.
night during a
I
blizzard
remember
because
falling.
younger employees
I
couldn't
remember
safely
thinking,
drive home.
this is it.
A woman from the
But
front
Michael
office told
didn't run
everyone
toward
how
the
I had
exit.
quietly
He
covered her
ran
husband's
toward me.
medical equipment
He dragged
after
me
he
across
stroked.
the concrete
I
floor
hadn't
while alarms
expected those
echoed
stories.
through the building.
Honestly,
Later,
the
the
doctors
doctors
told me
some of
another
them
30
entirely.
seconds inside
When you
that
help
room
someone,
would have been
you
fatal.
don't usually
Michael
keep records.
never spoke about
You
it
simply
afterward.
move on.
Whenever
Then
someone
Richard
called him a
invited
hero,
me to the
he'd
stage.
shrug. The
You would
applause
have done the
lasted
same.
nearly a full
Maybe
minute.
I would have.
Standing under those
Maybe
bright
not.
lights felt
I'll
uncomfortable
never know
in a way
because
I
he
couldn't
never gave me
entirely
the
explain.
chance.
I would
Years
have
later,
preferred organizing
did
inventory
what that
or
explosion
troubleshooting
couldn't.
a machine.
Watching
Anything
Michael
except
disappear
becoming
one
the
hospital
center of
visit
attention
at a time remains
Richard
one of the
handed
hardest
me the
things I've
Lifetime
ever lived
Legacy
through.
Award. The night
A
before
heavy
he
crystal
died,
sculpture
he asked
engraved
everyone
with my
else
name
to leave
and
the
the
room.
years.
Just the
40
two of us
years.
remained. It
He
suddenly
reached
felt
for
real.
my hand.
You earned
Look after
every
my
single
boy.
one of them.
I
he
nodded.
said. Then
You
the
won't have
MC
to ask
returned
twice.
Thomas,
He smiled.
we noticed someone
I knew
sitting
that.
beside you today.
Those were the
last words
The large
he ever
screen
said to me.
displayed
David was
His
19
eyes
then.
went wide.
Too young
Would
to
you
lose his
tell us
father.
about him?
Too proud to
I
ask
stepped
anyone
closer
for help.
to the microphone.
He worked evenings
David looked
stocking
like he
shelves
wanted
at a
the
grocery
floor
store.
to disappear
Attended community
beneath him.
college during
His
the day.
name is
Delivered
David
food
Sullivan.
on weekends. My closest
Every time
friend,
I offered
Michael
money,
Sullivan,
he politely
worked beside me
refused.
for nearly
I'll
30 years.
figure it out.
Several
So instead,
retired employees
I found
smiled
other ways.
immediately. When his old truck
Many
finally gave
remembered
out,
Michael.
I connected him
He
with a
saved
retired
my
mechanic
during an
who rebuilt
explosion
engines
at our
for
old
nearly
plant.
nothing. When he
The
transferred
ballroom
to
went
Ohio State's
completely
engineering
still.
program,
When
I
cancer
helped him
took him,
find affordable
David
housing
was
through
only
people I
19.
trusted. When he
I
graduated,
glanced
I was
toward
in the
him.
audience.
His father
Not because
asked me
anyone
for one
expected me
thing
to be,
before he died,
but because I had
My
made a
voice
promise
caught.
to his father.
He asked
Life,
me
though,
to look
had
after
other
his
plans
son.
for David's career
David
path.
lowered his
He
head.
discovered discovered he
I never
cared more
replaced
about
his father.
mentoring teenagers than working in
but I've
engineering.
watched him become
He
the kind of
became
man
a public
every
school
father hopes to
robotics
raise.
teacher. Some people thought he was
applauded.
wasting his degree.
David wiped
I
his
disagreed
eyes quietly.
completely.
If
Every
anyone
Christmas
deserved
he
to sit
mailed
in my
me a
son's
handwritten
seat today,
card.
I said,
Every
looking
birthday,
directly at him.
he called.
It was David.
Whenever my gutters
The
needed
room
cleaning
stood.
or my furnace
A
acted
standing
up,
ovation.
David somehow
Longer than
found out
before
I
stronger,
asked. more
He'd
emotional.
simply arrive
I
with a
watched
toolbox,
people wiping tears,
figured you
including
could use
several
another
executives
set
who
of
had spent
hands.
30 years pretending
That's
not
the
to have
kind
them.
of man he
Just when I
became.
believed the
Not
ceremony
because
had reached its
anyone
end,
rewarded
Richard
him for
stepped
it,
back toward the
because
microphone.
that's who Michael
Actually,
had raised.
we have
The
one
next
final
morning,
surprise.
I arrived at the convention center early.
This had
David
not
was
been
already
rehearsed.
standing
Richard
outside.
reached into
He
a
wore the
folder.
same navy suit
About 12
I'd
years
seen him
ago,
in at several
Thomas
funerals
Calloway
and
approached
the
the
board
weddings,
with an
but
unusual
he stood
request.
straighter than many
He
executives
looked around
walking
the
through those
ballroom.
doors.
Instead of
You
accepting
clean up
future
well,
executive
I told
retention
him.
bonuses,
He laughed.
he asked us to
It's
invest
the
those
only
funds
suit
into
I
something
own.
that would outlive
It
him.
looks perfect.
The audience
He
leaned
handed me a
forward.
small gift bag.
You didn't have to bring me anything. It's not much. Inside sat a simple leather-bound journal. The first page held one handwritten line. Some men earn promotions. Others earn respect. You taught me the difference. For several seconds, I couldn't speak. Finally, I looked up. Your father would be proud. David smiled quietly. I've spent 20 years hoping you'd say that. Before we walked inside, my phone vibrated. Marcus had posted a new photograph online. He and Diane stood beside a sparkling resort pool. Oversized sunglasses, cocktails in hand. The caption read, "Finally taking the vacation we deserve. Life is too short." Thousands of miles away. Both of them smiling. I locked my phone and turned toward David. Ready, as I'll ever be. Neither of us knew that within 2 hours, the entire country watching that broadcast would witness a moment none of us had expected. The ballroom looked even larger with every seat filled. More than 400 people had gathered, executives, factory workers, office staff, retirees, community leaders, local reporters. 2 television cameras operated quietly near the stage. Everything felt polished and professional, far more than anything I had imagined when I'd said yes to the ceremony. David and I sat together in the front row. He kept glancing around as though someone might realize he didn't belong. I leaned toward him. Relax. I'm trying. You look like you're about to take a final exam. He laughed. I've taught classrooms full of teenagers. Somehow this is scarier. Trust me, teenagers are tougher. That finally made him settle. A few seats away sat members of the executive board. Most had worked with me for decades. Several gave small nods. Others came over to shake my hand. But every few minutes, I noticed someone's eyes drift toward the empty chair that had been reserved for Marcus. Nobody asked where he was. Nobody had to. The empty seat spoke loudly enough. At exactly 2 o'clock, the lights dimmed. A video began across 3 large screens. There I was, 27 years old, hair thick enough that I barely recognized myself, standing beside the first production line I ever supervised. Another photograph appeared, Helen and me at the company Christmas party in 1991. She wore a red dress she'd bought on clearance because we were setting aside every extra dollar for Marcus's future college fund. She had looked beautiful. The next image showed Marcus himself, 7 years old, wearing an oversized hard hat during family day. He had insisted he wanted to work beside his dad someday. My chest tightened. Funny how life changes. The audience applauded as each decade passed across the screen. 40 years compressed into 5 minutes looks simple. Only I knew how many missed weekends, overnight shifts, late birthday celebrations, and quiet sacrifices had filled the spaces between those photographs. The MC returned to the stage. Thomas Calloway has become more than an employee. She smiled. He became the standard the rest of us measured ourselves against. More applause. Then she invited our CEO, Richard Holloway, to the podium. Richard wasn't a flashy businessman. He'd started sweeping warehouse floors while attending college. Eventually, he became president of the company. We had always respected each other because neither of us had forgotten where we started. He adjusted the microphone. I've spent 31 years working beside Thomas. He looked toward me. In all that time, I never once questioned whether he would do the right thing. He paused. Sometimes the right thing cost him promotions.
The audience stirred. He turned down executive opportunities that would have required relocating his family across the country. He nodded toward me. He also declined performance bonuses on several occasions. I frowned slightly. We hadn't agreed to discuss that. Richard smiled as though reading my expression. I know Thomas hates attention. Laughter moved through the room. But today isn't about his comfort. It's about telling the truth. One executive after another came forward with stories. A maintenance supervisor described how I'd stayed through the night during a blizzard because younger employees couldn't safely drive home. A woman from the front office told everyone how I had quietly covered her husband's medical equipment after his stroke. I hadn't expected those stories. Honestly, I had forgotten some of them entirely. When you help someone, you don't usually keep records. You simply move on. Then Richard invited me to the stage. The applause lasted nearly a full minute. Standing under those bright lights felt uncomfortable in a way I couldn't entirely explain. I would have preferred organizing inventory or troubleshooting a machine, anything except becoming the center of attention. Richard handed me the Lifetime Legacy Award. A heavy crystal sculpture engraved with my name and the years. 40 years. It suddenly felt real. You earned every single one of them, he said. Then the MC returned. Thomas, we noticed someone sitting beside you today. The large screen displayed David. His eyes went wide. Would you tell us about him? I stepped closer to the microphone. David looked like he wanted the floor to disappear beneath him. His name is David Sullivan. My closest friend, Michael Sullivan, worked beside me for nearly 30 years. Several retired employees smiled immediately. Many remembered Michael. He saved my life during an explosion at our old plant. The ballroom went completely still. When cancer took him, David was only 19. I glanced toward him. His father asked me for one thing before he died. My voice caught. He asked me to look after his son. David lowered his head. I never replaced his father. I couldn't. But I've watched him become the kind of man every father hopes to raise. The audience applauded. David wiped his eyes quietly. If anyone deserved to sit in my son's seat today, I said, looking directly at him, it was David. The room stood. A standing ovation, longer than before, stronger, more emotional. I watched people wiping tears, including several executives who had spent 30 years pretending not to have them. Just when I believed the ceremony had reached its end, Richard stepped back toward the microphone. Actually, we have one final surprise. I looked at him. This had not been rehearsed. Richard reached into a folder. About 12 years ago, Thomas Calloway approached the board with an unusual request. He looked around the ballroom. Instead of accepting future executive retention bonuses, he asked us to invest those funds into something that would outlive him. The audience leaned forward. He called it the Legacy Gratitude Fund. Richard opened the folder and read from a letter I had completely forgotten writing. His exact words were, "Money disappears. Character doesn't. Help one good person and they'll spend a lifetime helping others." The room became perfectly still. Richard folded the letter carefully. For years, this fund grew quietly. Additional company contributions, investment returns, private donations from retired executives. He paused. Today it has reached $800,000. Gasps filled the ballroom. I stared at him. Even I hadn't known the final number. The agreement gave Thomas one privilege, Richard continued. He alone would choose the very first recipient. Every camera turned toward me. Richard looked directly at David. David Sullivan, please join us on stage. David stood slowly. His knees visibly shook as he walked toward us. Richard extended his hand. On behalf of Midwest Industrial Systems, we are honored to present you with the first Legacy Gratitude Award. $800,000. David stared. His voice disappeared entirely. I can't accept this. Richard smiled gently. You already have. David looked at me, his eyes full of tears. Why? I placed my hand on his shoulder. Because your father once saved my life. I smiled through my own tears. And because you've spent the last 20 years honoring his. The audience rose again. The applause seemed like it would never end. I had no idea that somewhere in Arizona, Marcus and Diane had just watched every second of it on live television. I didn't leave the ballroom immediately. After the applause finally faded, dozens of people gathered around David and me. Former colleagues wanted photographs. Retirees offered hugs. Men who had once seemed impossible to impress as a young worker stood in line simply to shake my hand one final time. I've never seen a ceremony like this, someone from Human Resources said. I think half the room cried, another employee laughed. I smiled. I wasn't planning on any of that. That's why everyone loved it. David still looked overwhelmed. Every few minutes he would whisper the same words. I still can't believe this. I finally pulled him aside. Listen to me. He looked up, eyes still watery. That money isn't a reward for one afternoon. What do you mean? It's recognition for the man you've spent 20 years becoming. He shook his head. I don't know how to thank you. You already have. How? You showed up. He looked confused. Sometimes that's the greatest gift anyone can give. Richard found me a little later carrying 2 cups of coffee. He handed one over. You all right? I think so. He laughed quietly. I know you. You've been trying not to think about Marcus. I sighed. Am I that obvious? Only to old friends. We stood near a window overlooking downtown Cincinnati. The city moved below us without knowing anything had changed. Do you want our media team to remove any mention of Marcus from the broadcast? Richard finally asked. I thought about it carefully. The television coverage had clearly captured the empty chair. People would ask questions. Reporters are drawn to stories that write themselves, an aging father, an absent son, a surprise legacy. It was practically designed for viral attention. No, I said. Are you certain? I don't want anyone attacking him. But I also don't want the truth hidden. Richard placed a hand on my shoulder. You're a better father than most men would be. I wasn't sure that was true. Good fathers don't always raise good sons. Sometimes they simply keep loving them anyway. David insisted on following me home to make sure I arrived safely. He laughed when I tried to dismiss the idea. You've looked after me for 20 years. Let me return the favor for one afternoon. We drove north through afternoon traffic. When I reached the house, he parked behind me. We stood in the driveway talking for half an hour. What are you going to do with it? I asked. The money. Yes. He stared at the ground. I honestly haven't thought that far. I figured you'd already have a list. He smiled slowly. My students. I wasn't surprised. Our robotics program barely survives every year. We lose kids because families can't cover the equipment. I want every child who loves engineering to have a genuine chance. He paused, then laughed. And maybe replace my 15-year-old truck. I was wondering when you'd admit that. It's making some very concerning noises. You've earned something newer. No. He looked at me seriously. My father earned that. Those words hit me harder than I expected. Michael would have smiled hearing his son say them. After David left, I walked inside. The silence felt familiar. I loosened my tie, hung my jacket, set the Crystal Award carefully on the fireplace mantel beside Helen's photograph. I looked at her face. You would have liked today. For a moment, I could almost hear her answering. Then my phone began vibrating across the kitchen table. Once. Twice. Again. Again. Unknown numbers. Marcus. Diane. Marcus again. Finally, I picked it up. The missed call screen seemed endless. 112 calls total. My phone rang once more. Marcus. This time I answered. Hi, son. His breathing sounded rushed, almost panicked. Dad. Yes. Why didn't you tell me? I looked around my quiet kitchen. Tell you what? The money. $800,000. You knew. I knew there would be a gift. I didn't know the amount. You never told me. You never asked. Silence. Dad, Ashley and I are driving to the airport. We're leaving Scottsdale. There's no need for that. Dad, you've already paid for the flights. This isn't about the vacation. What is it about then? He hesitated. Then, quietly, I should have been there. I closed my eyes. Yes, I made a mistake. You did. Another long silence. Are you angry? He asked. I thought carefully before answering. No. I'm disappointed. There is a very real difference between the two. Anger tends to fade. Disappointment settles much deeper, and it stays. Ashley suddenly came on the line. Thomas, I think we've all gotten a little carried away. How do you mean? People online are making Marcus look like some terrible son. I haven't spoken to anyone online. I know, but that empty chair. What about it? It embarrassed us. I took a slow breath. No, Ashley. What? It didn't embarrass you. My voice remained entirely even. You embarrassed yourselves. Silence. You could have warned us. I invited you. That's more than a warning. Her voice turned colder. People think that other man deserves that money more than Marcus. I answered, honestly. That's because David was there. She made a sharp sound. So that's it? You replaced your own son. No. I kept my voice steady. Marcus replaced himself. She had nothing left to say. She handed the phone back. Marcus spoke quietly. Dad, I'm coming over tonight. All right. I love you. The words surprised me. He hadn't said them in months, maybe longer. I love you too, son. The call ended. Within hours, clips from the ceremony were everywhere. Local television stations replayed the announcement. National websites picked up the story. Comment sections erupted. Many people praised David. Many admired the fund. But others focused entirely on the empty chair. Complete strangers shared stories about parents who had quietly sacrificed everything, only to be forgotten by their children as the years passed. Reading those comments made me uneasy. People only knew one afternoon. They didn't know my son. Not really. Marcus wasn't cruel. He wasn't selfish by nature. He had simply spent too many years assuming there would always be another chance, another birthday, another dinner, another phone call, another ceremony. Life has a painful way of proving otherwise. As darkness settled over the neighborhood, headlights finally appeared in my driveway. Marcus had come home. But he wasn't alone. Diane stepped out of the passenger seat beside him. And judging by her expression, this conversation was going to be more complicated than I had expected. Marcus climbed out with his shoulders forward, looking older than he had that same morning. Diane followed him, but unlike Marcus, she wasn't carrying regret. She was carrying anger. Ryan, Marcus, stood quietly at the edge of the driveway. Diane walked straight toward the front porch. Thomas, she called before I opened the screen door. We need to talk. I unlocked the door. You'd better come in. Neither of them spoke as they entered. Diane looked around the living room as though she hadn't quite registered it before. The worn leather recliner, the brick fireplace, Helen's favorite quilt folded neatly over the arm of the couch, the family photographs covering one wall. Marcus stopped in front of those photographs. There he was at 6 years old, holding his first baseball trophy. At 16, after getting his driver's license. The two of us together on his college graduation day, Helen standing between us, smiling so brightly it still hurt to look at. Marcus swallowed hard. I haven't been here in a while. No, I said softly. You haven't. Silence settled over the room. Diane broke it. I'll just say what we're both thinking. $800,000. You've known David for years. You could have at least said something. I poured 3 glasses of iced tea and placed them on the coffee table. No one touched theirs. I didn't know the amount. You knew there was money. I knew there would be a gift. She leaned forward. And you chose someone else's son. I met her eyes. I chose someone who showed up. Marcus closed his eyes. Dad. Diane turned toward him. Don't just sit there. He should have told us. Marcus looked exhausted. He invited us, Diane. We said no. Her face hardened. So you're taking his side now? I'm taking the truth. The room went quiet. For the first time since she'd walked inside, Diane had nothing to say. Marcus looked at me. I owe you an apology. Yes. I'm sorry. I believe you. He looked surprised. You do. I believe you're sorry. I paused. I just don't know yet what you're sorry about. He frowned. What do you mean? Are you sorry because you hurt me, or because everyone else witnessed it? He didn't answer. Not because he was being stubborn. Because he genuinely didn't know. I stood and walked down the hallway to the spare room. When I returned, I carried 3 old storage boxes. Marcus recognized them immediately. I haven't seen those since. His voice faded. Since Mom. Open them. He slowly lifted the lid of the first. Inside were folders, receipts, envelopes, handwritten notes. What is all this? Our life. He picked up a faded tuition statement from Ohio State. His name across the top. The balance marked, paid in full. Another envelope held canceled checks, one after another, semester after semester. Books, housing, meal plans. I thought scholarships covered most of this. They covered some. I never knew. You weren't supposed to. He reached deeper into the box. Mortgage documents, the down payment for his first house, the loan I'd quietly co-signed and removed my name from 2 years later. Receipts from his wedding, the photographer, the florist, the reception hall. Marcus stared at one. His eyes widened. Dad, you paid for this. I helped. I thought Grandpa. He looked up. You never said anything. What would have been the point? Parents don't raise children expecting a running tab of gratitude. We do it because that's what parents do. He opened the second box. Inside sat dozens of photographs. One showed Helen sewing patches onto his Little League uniform after working a 10-hour shift at the hospital. Another showed me replacing our aging roof because hiring someone would have meant postponing his college savings. There were camping trips instead of expensive vacations. Cakes baked at home instead of ordered from bakeries. Not because we couldn't sometimes spend more. Because every extra dollar had a destination. Marcus's future. He picked up a photograph of Helen beside our old station wagon. I remember this car. It had almost 200,000 miles. You always said you liked it. I hated it. He laughed through tears. Why didn't you replace it? Because the transmission repair cost less than your freshman textbooks. His shoulders began to shake. He looked at the photograph for a long moment. I never knew. I know. The third box held something different. Letters. Dozens of them. Every birthday card Helen had ever written to Marcus before she died. Every Christmas note. Every handwritten message she had tucked into his lunchbox during elementary school. Marcus carefully unfolded one. Her handwriting filled the page. No matter how old you become, always remember. Time is the most valuable gift you can give someone you love. His tears finally came. Real tears. Not embarrassment, not panic. Grief. Regret. The kind that arrives when you understand something too late. He covered his face with both hands. I've become the man she warned me not to be. No one spoke. The silence said enough. A soft knock at the door interrupted everything. I opened it. David stood on the front step holding a small cardboard box. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "I didn't realize you had company." "It's all right." Marcus stood. David immediately looked like he should go. "Please stay," Marcus said. David stepped inside. He set the box on the kitchen counter. "I brought dinner. I figured after today, nobody remembered to eat." I laughed. "You didn't have to do that." "I know." That sentence, the quiet ease of it, sounded exactly like his father. Marcus watched the exchange carefully. He noticed something I don't think he'd registered before. David knew where the plates were kept. He knew which cabinet held the glasses. He even knew the coffee maker needed the switch pressed twice before it would start. Not because he lived there. Because he had been visiting, helping, and showing up quietly for years. While my own son had been somewhere else. Marcus looked at David. "How often do you come by?" David hesitated. "Every couple of weeks," I answered. "Sometimes more." Marcus nodded slowly. "You've been taking care of my dad." David looked at the floor. "He took care of me first." Diane stood abruptly. "This is unbelievable." All three of us looked at her. So now everyone gets to act like Marcus is some terrible person? No one answered. She grabbed her purse. "I'm not sitting here for this." Marcus turned to her. "You should go." She blinked. "What?" "You heard me." His voice was quiet but certain. "I need to stay." She stared at him for several long seconds. Then she walked out the front door. The sound of it closing moved through the house. Marcus didn't follow. Instead, he slowly turned back toward me. For the first time in years, he wasn't looking at me like an obligation. He was looking at me like his father. After Diane left, the house felt strangely peaceful. No one rushed to fill the silence. David unpacked the dinner quietly. Chicken noodle soup. Fresh bread from the bakery down the road. An apple pie that looked remarkably close to the kind Helen used to bake every autumn. "I hope you don't mind," David said. "I figured today was too important for fast food." We sat down together. Three men. Three very different stories. For the first few minutes nobody said much. Sometimes reconciliation is imagined as a single speech, a grand declaration. Real life rarely works that way. More often, healing begins over something as ordinary as sharing a meal. Marcus finally broke the silence. "I honestly can't remember the last time we had dinner together." I looked at him. "It was Thanksgiving." He frowned. "No. That was 3 years ago." His face fell. "I thought it had only been a year." I nodded gently. Time moves faster than we realize. That sentence lingered over the table far longer than anything else we said that evening. The week that followed felt different. Marcus called every morning. Not to ask for anything, not to explain himself again. Simply to ask, "How are you today, Dad?" At first, I wondered whether guilt was doing the talking. But guilt gets tired eventually. Consistency doesn't. Monday became Tuesday. Tuesday became Friday. The calls continued. One afternoon, he arrived carrying 2 fishing rods. "I found these in my garage." I recognized them immediately. One was his. One was mine. "I thought maybe, if you're free, Saturday." I smiled. "I've been free for years." His eyes watered. "I know." That Saturday, we drove to the same little lake where I taught him to fish when he was 8 years old. The old wooden dock still leaned slightly to one side. The paint had faded. The benches had been replaced. Everything else felt familiar. Marcus cast his line and was quiet for a moment. I used to think success meant having the biggest house, the nicest vacations, the newest car. He laughed softly at himself. I spent so much time chasing things that I forgot to make time for people. I didn't interrupt. He needed to hear himself say it. My whole life, you always showed up. He looked at me, and I stopped showing up for you. Yes. I'm ashamed of that. I know you are. You're not making this easy. No. I smiled gently. Forgiveness isn't difficult. Trust is. He accepted that without arguing. That alone told me something was changing. David's life had transformed almost overnight. News stations continued telling the story of the Legacy Gratitude Fund. Parents wrote letters thanking him for becoming a teacher. Former students posted messages describing how he had inspired them to pursue engineering. Rather than retreating from the attention, David used it for something meaningful. He announced that nearly half of the award would establish scholarships for students interested in robotics and skilled trades. I wouldn't be standing here, he told reporters during one interview, if someone hadn't believed in me long before I believed in myself. He never mentioned my name unless someone asked directly. That was typical David. He always redirected praise toward someone else. A month later, he invited Marcus and me to visit his classroom. Teenagers crowded around unfinished robots, computer screens, and workbenches. One young girl approached shyly. "Mr. Sullivan says you're the reason we got new equipment." "No," I said, and pointed toward David across the room. "He's the reason." She smiled. "He says you taught him generosity." David overheard her. He looked at me across the classroom. Neither of us said a word. We didn't need to. Michael would have understood. Marcus began coming to the house every Sunday. Sometimes we watched football. Sometimes we worked in the yard. Sometimes we simply sat on the back porch with coffee, watching the maple tree Helen and I had planted sway in the afternoon wind. He never behaved as though one apology had cleared 30 years of distance. Instead, he did something much harder. He kept showing up. One afternoon, he brought over a small toolbox. "What are we fixing?" I asked. "The fence. It isn't broken." He smiled. "I know. I just wanted an excuse to spend the day with you." I laughed harder than I had in months. "You finally sound like my son again." Diane and Marcus separated quietly a few weeks later. No dramatic conflict, no public falling apart, just two people who had finally admitted they wanted different lives. One evening Marcus said, "I don't blame Diane." I looked at him. I made my own choices. I kept choosing convenience. I kept assuming you'd always understand. He shook his head slowly. "I mistook your patience for permission." That may have been the most honest thing he had ever said to me. Several months after the ceremony, Midwest Industrial Systems invited me back for the dedication of the Legacy Gratitude Mentorship Program. The company had decided to expand the original fund into an annual initiative, pairing experienced employees with young people entering skilled trades and engineering careers. Richard welcomed everyone with his usual quiet dignity. This all began because one man believed character should outlive a paycheck. This time, when I walked into the auditorium, the front row seat beside mine wasn't empty. Marcus was already there. He stood when he saw me coming. I wanted to make sure I got here early. "You certainly did. I wasn't going to miss this one." He smiled. "Not for anything." David sat on my other side. I looked at the two men beside me. One connected by blood. The other connected by a promise kept to a dying friend. I realized something sitting between them that I hadn't been able to name until that moment. Family isn't weakened by gratitude. It's strengthened by it. The ceremony itself was quieter than the first. No surprise gifts, no television cameras focused on an empty chair, no announcements that shook the room. Just dozens of young apprentices meeting mentors who genuinely cared about their futures. That mattered more than any headline could. As we walked toward the parking lot afterward, Marcus stopped beside my truck. "Dad." "Yes." "Thank you." "For what?" "For loving me." His voice dropped. "Even when I made it hard." I placed my hand on his shoulder. "Being your father was never the hard part." "What was?" "Waiting for you to find your way home." He wrapped his arms around me. The kind of embrace that lasts long enough to say everything words cannot reach. For the first time in years, I felt my family becoming whole again. Not because money had changed anyone. Money hadn't repaired a single thing. Choices had. Time had. Humility had. And love, the quiet, stubborn kind that refuses to disappear, had finally been met with gratitude. If this story reminded you of someone who has sacrificed quietly for your family, don't wait for a special occasion to tell them what they mean to you. Time is the one gift none of us can earn back. And if this journey touched your heart, I'd be honored if you shared it with someone who needs the reminder, and subscribe for more stories about family, second chances, and the strength it takes to choose love over pride.